If you were there for the last week's presentation, we talked about problem solution fit. And this week, we're going to talk about product market fit. In problem solution fit, we talked about how to identify the customer. So defining your customer persona, and then how to identify what problem they are facing so that you can actually create a problem that will create a product that will solve their problem. Today, we will talk more about the value hypothesis and the growth hypothesis. So now that you have identified a problem that a customer faces and have a potential solution that can solve that problem, you really need to start understanding what is the value that your product will add to the customer, and if you were to build a startup around this, how will you actually grow the startup? What will be your strategy for growing the startup? So why should you care about product market fit? And this is a quote from investor Mark Andreessen, who talks about product market fit, saying that you know that the fit is not happening when the customers aren't quite getting the value of the product, you're not spreading information about the product by word of mouth, the product usage is not growing, you're not getting any press, it takes you very long to close a sales cycle, and many times the deals never close. On the flip side, when product market fit is happening, you cannot make your product fast enough, right? The customers are literally buying your product as fast as you can make it. They are actually putting down money to buy your product, right? So you are getting revenue positive, and you're really being in that position to grow your team, hire in more sales and marketing people, etc. You're getting good press, you're getting nominated for stuff, your company becomes popular pretty quickly. Everything that you see happening with really successful companies is happening because they have identified the right product market fit. And often startups that struggle to launch or get off the ground are the ones who have not established a good product market fit for their startup. The thing is, this quote by Mark Andreessen is you will see this only after you launch the product, right? Whether customers are buying the product or customers are not buying the product, whether there's buzz around the product, whether there's press around the product, etc. All of this will happen only after you launch the product. But by that time, it's already too late. So you need to work on your product market fit way, way, way early in your product development process, so that when you actually launch your product, you are in the second set of startups where customers cannot wait to buy your product. And so for you to establish product market fit, this is not something that you do at the last minute. This is not something that you do 5 months before launch. This is something that you should be working on from the very beginning, because your product market fit should be built into your product development strategy. So we also talked about this infographic last time about the top 10 reasons why startups fail. And this is published by CB Insights. This is from last year. And the number one reason why startups fail is there is no market need. I linked that to problem solution fit last time. And I also link it to product market fit this time, because the two are interrelated. You need to have identified the right problem in order for you to have the right product market fit. Because if you've not done your problem solution right, you will not have the right product market fit. Another investor, Alex Schultz, says the number one problem that he has seen is that startups don't actually have a product market fit when they think they do. And this tends to happen often where we tend to let our biases get in the way, or maybe get fewer data points than required, or might go out and start validating our product and strategy before actually identifying the unmet needs, etc. And so if 42% of startups fail because of unmet product, no market need, that means that what Alex is saying is possibly true, that 50% of the startups think they have a product market fit when probably their product market fit is not the right product market fit. So let's go back, let's talk a little bit about problem solution fit. And so we'll go through this stepwise process. So how do you actually come up with the right product market fit, right? What is a process that you go through to come up with the right product market fit? And then process for identifying, the early process for identifying the right product market fit is the same as what you would do for problem solution fit. The difference is the questions that you will ask, right? So let's start with problem solution fit. You want to start with a hypothesis, right? So let's take a hypothesis that is close to all of us right now because of the pandemic, that doctors and nurses are tired and scared in the current pandemic. That is your current hypothesis. When you're trying to do problem solution, you take that early hypothesis and you test it. How do you test it? You go out and you talk to doctors and nurses. And you want to prove it. So in order to prove it, you have to make sure that you have gathered enough data from your conversations to make a conclusive statement. So 1 or 2 conversations is not sufficient. You need to have spoken to a critical mass of doctors and nurses so that the data that you're getting is something that is strong and that you can be confident about and say that, yes, this is, I believe that this is a real problem. And then you want to iterate it. So when you go out and test it, you might realize that the input that you are getting, maybe it validates your hypothesis 50%, or maybe it validates your hypothesis 80%. Whatever the differential in the validation, you need to take that as feedback. So, and refine your hypothesis based on the feedback that you're getting. So for example, for the current hypothesis, doctors and nurses are tired and scared in the current pandemic. Maybe you might hear that doctors and nurses are tired and scared in the current pandemic. You might get maybe additional inputs, right? Because, or they might, in some places, they might say, yes, we're very tired, but maybe scared is not the right word. Or we are scared, but we have enough capacity, we are not that overworked. So this will also vary, right, from hospital to hospital. Some hospitals that have good capacity, you might not really see doctors and nurses complain that they are exhausted, whereas in other places where they are low capacity, you might get a lot of doctors and nurses saying that they're probably really tired with the current situation. So you'll take all of that data and then you will have to reiterate and redefine your hypothesis. Sometimes when you go out and try to test your hypothesis, none of your customers might actually agree with your hypothesis. You might not actually get them to agree with what you think is the hypothesis. This is a point where you really need to step back and say, okay, I think this is wrong and I need to pivot, or I need to change direction, or I need to start over. Many people get so attached to their ideas or their hypothesis when they hear opinions from their customers that do not agree with them, they still somehow decide to push on by either refabricating or hearing, quote unquote, hearing what they want, etc. So you have to be very, very careful to be extremely open-minded in this situation and take the input that you're getting at its face value and not necessarily try and modify that input to actually match your hypothesis. So now that you have done this problem solution fit, let's talk about how you would follow the same process for a product market fit. So again, you will start with the hypothesis, but now your hypothesis is different because you already have identified a problem solution fit. You have already identified maybe in the first case scenario, you identified, yes, doctors are tired and scared in the current pandemic. And you have built out a solution to try and address that potential problem, right? And your solution is a remote care platform. Now, for product market fit, the hypothesis that you're testing is doctors and nurses would benefit from a remote care platform because A, it would save them time, and B, it would allow them to safely care for their patients. So what question you're asking is extremely important to what input that you're going to get from your customers. You will do the same thing. You will test this hypothesis. But at this point, you will go out and you will test your solution with doctors and nurses. You will actually show them the platform and get their feedback, see what they like about it, see what they don't like about it, see how they would use it. Ask them if they would pay for it. Is this something that would make their life easier? What problems would this help them solve? Get all of that feedback. Similarly, make sure that you're getting enough data to be able to prove your hypothesis, right? So don't limit it to 1 or 2 interviews with friends and family, but really go out and talk to people and get their feedback so that you have an aggregation of data that gives you data that you can be confident about. And then you iterate. So based on all the feedback that you get, you go back and modify the platform and features so that you are developing something that your customer wants. So there are various steps to product market fit, right? This is your early step of product market fit, where you have developed a solution and you are trying to validate that the solution you have developed actually A, solves the problem that you think the customer faces, and the solution that you have created adds value to your customer, helps them solve their problems, and really makes life easier for them. So after you've done this, the next step that you want to do is create your value hypothesis. So now you want to start asking questions around what value are you creating, right? So what value are you offering through the solution you've created? Who desperately needs it? And how will it solve their problem? And then lastly, how can they buy or use this product? So we will go through this, through these 3 questions next. So for the first 2 questions, we're basically going to use the first 2 questions to build out your value proposition. So remember, your customer wants to buy a 1/4 inch hole, not a 1/4 inch drill bit, which means that when a customer goes out and buys a product, they're buying a product to solve a problem that they have or to do a job that they need to do. They don't really care what your solution is if it does not solve their problem, right? So it doesn't matter how they create the job, as long as that job is done effectively. That's all that the customer cares about. So you need to identify, for you to create your value proposition, you need to understand what is the job that your customer is trying to do. Hopefully, you should have a pretty good handle on this if you've gone through the problem solution fit exercise correctly and you have done your early stage customer interaction for your product market, right? what what are the problems and pains that they're facing, and what are the expected benefits that they desire from a solution. So the top three questions: what job are they trying to do, what problems are they facing, and what are the expected benefits, is something that you should be able to have derived from your problem solution fit exercise. Then you're talking about how your product or service allows your customer to do the job that they need to do. How does your product help solve the problems that they're currently facing? And what benefits does your product offer? If you can if you can articulate this properly, you can articulate the value proposition of your product. This part is extremely important because unless and until you can clearly communicate the value proposition of your product, you won't really get customer buy-in, because they need these three questions answered if they're going to buy your product, if they're going to adopt your product. So another aspect that you have to know at this stage is who your customer is. And the who is extremely, extremely important, because your product might be able to appeal to multiple customer segments at the same time. But when you actually introduce your product into the market first, you will be introducing it only for one customer segment. You will not try and go after 5 or 6 customer segments at the same time, because then you're going to have a very hard time creating a targeted message, one, for your customer segment, two, creating a product that meets the requirements of all customer segments, right? Because every customer segment might have different requirements. There might be small tweaks here and there to your existing product, but you have to make sure that every product that you introduce into the market for a given customer segment meets their requirements. So it's very, very, very important for you to identify which customer segment are you going to go after first. Who is going to be your first adopter? Who is going to buy your product first? So you need to really understand where the problem is highest. Which customer segment is telling you, give me this product yesterday? When you go and talk to your customers, and your customer, the first question that your customer asks you is, oh, do you already have this on the market? That is a customer segment that is dying to have your product. So let me give you an example. When I was working with a researcher that was trying to develop a product, the initial hypothesis, it was a biomedical device for identifying a particular population of stem cells. And the initial hypothesis that they had was that this product would be valuable for companies that are working with mesenchymal stem cells. And it might be valuable for them to have a device that could help them identify the stem cell population that would be faster growing than a population that is slower growing, so that they could get there faster and inject less stem cells at the site, etc. When I started talking to these customer segments, I realized that the mesenchymal stem cell companies did not care about isolating their stem cell populations at all, because it was a soup of cells, and it was easy for them to collect a soup of cells and inject a large number of cells, because it was relatively easy for them to get a large number of cells, where and have a small percentage of stem cells actually be the working cells. So I talked to a lot of mesenchymal stem cell researchers and companies, and no one seemed to be interested in the product. And that told me that that initial hypothesis was wrong. The product market fit was not there. And so I started exploring multiple different segments, right? So I started talking to others. I started talking to companies that were doing cord blood cell differentiation. I identified about 6 or 7 potential customer segments where this product could have value. And I happened to talk to researchers that were working with induced pluripotent stem cells in the lab. It's a type of stem cell, don't need to get into technical details around it. When I talked to them, they asked me, the first question that they asked me as soon as I told them what we were trying to do was, oh, do you already have this on the market? This is really hard for us. If you have this on the market, we will buy it. And that response right there is when you know you have your product market fit. If I was going to market with that product, that is a customer segment that I would likely go after first, provided that it's a big enough market opportunity. With everybody else that I spoke with, they told me it's a nice to have. It's not a must have, except for this one group of people that I spoke to, where they were like, no, this is a must have for the work that we are doing. They had a very, very strong problem pain point that nothing was solving. Nothing in the market was currently solving their problem. And they needed a solution for it. And that is how product market fit works. And that is how you need to know that you have the right customer segment for the product that you are developing. The other thing that you need to do in your value proposition statement is be able to clearly articulate how you differ from your competition. So once you've identified what is the pain point that your product is solving and what is the value that your product is adding, you also need to add how you're different from your customer, from your competition, because this question will come up pretty often, more often than you will think, is, oh yeah, there's this company that's already doing that. Why do I need your product? And so you have to have a clear differentiator from how your product is different from the existing competition in the market. Once you have this, your value proposition built out, you need to make sure that you do traditional market research, right? You need to identify what is your market, how big is your market, and what is the share of your market. So this is the most basic way for you to do it. So let's talk about the market for diabetes. There are 100 million people in the United States that the CDC says are either diabetic or pre-diabetic, right? So that right there, if you are developing a diabetic product, that is your total market. But of those diabetics, 88 million, only 34 million are diabetics. The rest of them are pre-diabetics. Maybe the product, and with pre-diabetics, many of them can keep their diabetes in control if they lost weight, if they increased their activity, if they exercised, etc., right? So maybe they're not your target population. So now you narrowed your market to your total addressable market of 34 million people. And maybe your product is really valuable to diabetics who are who have to undergo an amputation, a limb amputation because of non-healing wounds in diabetics. That is 44,000 people in the world, in the United States. So that is the niche that you're going to go after. Often people make the mistake of saying their total market is their market, right? So if you're developing a diabetes product and you say, oh, there are 100 million diabetes patients in the United States, and this is a very large market, you will be shot down by every VC in town because they need to know which diabetic population will actually benefit from your product. So it's important for you to identify the niche for your product and know what is the value of that particular market. And then what percent of that market, what percent share of that market will your product be able to capture, say, in the first 5 years? You also need to think about your total addressable market. So maybe your initial market might have been diabetic patients that are undergoing amputation. But when you look at the product might also have applications in other diabetic patients that are susceptible to getting wounds. And now you need to start looking at your total addressable market, which is your 34 million patients. So you have to not only think about your niche, which is going to be your first market segment, but then how will you expand from that niche of this target population into a larger market further down the line? Because unless and until you have plans from going from one market segment into the other, if you're banking your entire startup strategy on a single market segment, you will have a very hard time getting investors to invest in your company. So you not only need to know what is your first adopter and what is the first market segment that you're going to go after, but also have a strategy for after you've captured that market segment, how will you go into subsequent markets? All right. So after you established your value hypothesis, the next thing you need to look at is your growth hypothesis. So the growth hypothesis is basically how will your customer be able to buy your product? How will you reach your customers? And this is effectively your channel strategy. What channels will you use to get to your customers? So let's talk about 3 major ones, right? One is the sticky engine growth strategy, which is that you have a few existing customers. They are pretty large customers. They're very good business. And your strategy is to retain those customers. This works well for products that are high value products, right? Biological products, tech products, etc., which are extremely high value products. And so having 1 or 2 large clients might sometimes be sufficient to keep your startup not only get off the ground, but keep going. If this is your strategy, then in addition to customer retention, obviously you can't just say, okay, I have 3 customers and I'm going to keep them. You still have to have a strategy for recruiting more customers, but the recruiting more customers is going to be a slower process because your product is an expensive product and you're going to have longer sales cycles into recruiting new customers into buying your product. The second is the viral engine growth strategy. This is basically what HubSpot was built. What HubSpot was built around, right? Where you are creating enough of a social media presence, or your product is that good that you are getting customers to come to you. You're providing content, you're active on social media, you're providing value through things like what we are doing right now, a webinar or a workshop or something like that, that is educating people and allowing your customers to actually come to you and say, I like the product that you're selling, I want to buy it. It can be a product or a service, right? So the viral engine growth happens by word of mouth, or maybe you might be using a product for application X and you might find some other use for it that was not advertised. And now you go around telling your friends about it and now everybody's suddenly using it for that. Viagra is a great example of that. For you to be successful in the viral engine growth strategy, you have to have a perfect product market fit. If you don't have a good product market fit, it will be very difficult for you to be successful using the viral engine growth strategy, because you are banking on your customers coming to you, which means that you have to be able to really speak to them and they have to identify that, yes, this is a real problem that I'm facing that I need to solve. So for the second method to be successful, you have to have an excellent product market fit. And then the last one, which most of us are familiar with, is the paid engine growth strategy, which is outbound marketing, where we are cold calling people, we are advertising, we are going to trade shows, conferences, etc. We are actually paying to put our product out there for the customer to be able to see that product, get familiar with that product and say, yes, this is something that I might be interested in buying. So you have to identify, based on your startup, which is the right strategy for you. You might be able to use more than one strategy, and you might be phasing which growth strategy you will use depending upon where in the product life cycle or sales life cycle your startup is. For example, if you're in the sticky engine growth strategy where you are working on customer retention and trying to recruit one or two new customers, you might combine your sticky engine growth strategy along with a paid engine growth strategy to get the word out there to more customers. If you are in B2C market spaces, as in business to customer, where you're selling your product not to another business, but directly to a customer, like retail, like Uber, like Airbnb, you absolutely need to have a viral engine growth strategy, because your sales and your value is going to be in the number of customers that you are recruiting, because your product is not a very high value product, right? The markup on each product will be low. The price that a customer is paying for each product is low. And so you need a lot of customers to be profitable, which means you absolutely need a viral engine growth strategy. And then you might couple that with a paid engine growth. So along with making your product go viral, you're also paying for advertisements and other things so that your customers hear about your product. So you have to decide based on your customer, based on your startup, based on the product that you're selling, based on where on the sales life cycle you are, to decide which is the right growth strategy for you. Once you have these three things that we discussed, which is a very clear understanding of what is the customer's need and what is their problem and what job are you helping them do, a clear understanding of what is your market, how big is your market, what niche of that market belongs to you, and what % of that market share will your startup be able to capture, and how will you get to your customer. Once you have these three things in place, you will be able to come up with your revenue model for your company, as in really understand how your startup will actually make money and become profitable and sustainable and scalable in the long run. So in this session today, we talked about these 5 things related to product market strategy. We talked about how to define and test your value hypothesis. We talked about how to build your value proposition, how to define your market size and target customer, how to define and test your growth hypotheses, and then lastly, how to build your revenue model. And once you have these 5 things in place, you will have a good product market fit, or at least you should be confident that the product market fit that you have is solving a real problem, is a need, and that when you go to market, you will have good adoption for your product. So I will put this up again, the quote by Mark Andreessen, to remind you that you want to be in the second group of startups. When you launch your product, you want to be that startup where your product is flying off the shelves, which means that you have the right product fit identified early on, and you have developed your product to solve a customer need that will allow customers to buy your product. With that, I will open it up for questions. You can reach out to me and contact me if you want to talk to me more. That's my email, my phone number, as well as you can schedule a time to talk with me through the ScienceDocs website. Thank you so much for your time today, and I would be happy to take any questions that you would have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kapadia. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask her directly, or if you don't feel comfortable talking, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll pitch the questions to her. But I guess to just start off, how do I know that I have the right customer?
So I think I actually kind of touched on this a little bit, right? In the example that I gave, which is if you have the right customer, your customer is going to be demanding your product yesterday. They will be excited about what you are selling. They understand that you're solving a clear problem that they have, and that they want to buy your product. You know you have the right customer when the customer is willing to open their wallet in order to buy your product.
I guess to follow up with that is, how do I know which growth model should I use if I'm a startup?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, how do I know which growth model I should use when doing the product marketing?
Oh, okay. So what growth model you use depends on, you have to first understand whether you're a B2B startup or a B2C startup. If you're a B2C startup, you need to be able to talk to your customers directly, the customers who are going to be using your product. If you are a business-to-business startup where, let's say, I am a biotech company that is going to be selling to doctors and nurses, the entity that's going to buy my product is a hospital. So I, as a business, am selling to another business. And so often I will use the advertising model, or the customer retention model for it. If I am in my, it is very hard to get the viral strategy going. And so often you might want to start off with the paid growth strategy early on in your, if you're early on in your startup, in your product launch process. Because typically, if you have been working on a viral growth strategy, it will typically take about a year and a half for the inbound marketing effect to actually hit, which means that you need to have another strategy in that time. And going to trade shows, going to conferences, paying for advertisements, putting out articles in publications, all of those would be good early strategies versus till your viral strategy hits and becomes, starts bringing customers in through the door for you.